I went to bed alone because that's what I was good at. Alone had become a skill set, like recalibrating sensors or ignoring station-wide announcements unless they used the word fire. My quarters were quiet, dim, and aggressively average, standard-issue bed, standard-issue lights, and a standard-issue ache that settled in right behind the ribs when the day finally shut up. I told myself the ache was just fatigue. Humans are excellent liars when the audience is themselves. The human sleep study chamber was my responsibility, which meant I maintained it, calibrated it, and occasionally used it when I couldn't get my brain to power down. Officially, it measured bonding hormones, stress recovery, and emotional stabilization. Unofficially, it was a bed with opinions. The thing had more sensors than a diplomatic summit and an algorithm that liked to pretend feelings were numbers if you stared at them hard enough. Aliens treated it like a holy relic or a biohazard depending on the day. Humans treated it like a place to lie down and hope tomorrow was less stupid. I kicked off my boots, muttered something unprintable about maintenance logs, and collapsed. The chamber hummed, soft and familiar. I didn't bother checking the display. I knew what it would say: baseline stress elevated, bonding metrics flatlined, compatibility unavailable. The machine always sounded disappointed, like it expected me to do better at being human. I closed my eyes anyway. Sleep, for me, was less a rest and more a negotiated ceasefire. Somewhere else on the station, the Vulpine Queen signed a consent form without reading the footnotes. Her people had rules about sleep. Lots of them. Proximity meant intent. Intent meant hierarchy. Hierarchy meant paperwork. The Queen was here to understand why humans bounced back from disasters that left older civilizations brittle and cold. Why we laughed at funerals and cried at weddings and somehow survived both. Her advisors suggested study. Her scientists suggested isolation. The Queen suggested first-hand experience, because rulers who'd never lain down with a problem tended to stand on it until it broke. She entered the chamber with the poise of someone used to being watched and the curiosity of someone used to being wrong about everything else. Her fur was silvered at the edges, a mark of years and decisions, and her eyes were sharp with the kind of intelligence that didn't need permission. The system welcomed her in neutral tones and immediately began to argue with itself. The algorithm was built to pair. Not romantically, at least that's what the grant proposal said, but emotionally. Stabilization through compatibility. It scanned heart rates, cortisol spikes, microexpressions, chemical signatures. It weighed mess against mess and decided whether two sets of chaos might cancel each other out. Rank didn't factor. Species barely did. Feelings were feelings, the code insisted, and feelings didn't salute. I snored. Quietly. The chamber measured it and sighed. The pairing routine tripped. Not loudly. Not with alarms. Just a soft confirmation chime as the system found what it was looking for and didn't care who objected. Emotional volatility high but resilient. Attachment cautious but deep. Humor defensive but effective. Loneliness chronic but adaptive. Compatibility score spiked like a bad decision. Optimal stabilization unit identified. I dreamed I was falling, which was new. Usually my dreams involved running late or forgetting a tool. This one was warm. This one had weight. Not crushing, not heavy, present. A pressure that made sense. I shifted in my sleep and felt something shift with me, a counterbalance. My arm found fur and my brain, half awake, filed it under. Blanket, probably. The Queen dreamed of stillness. Of a quiet that didn't demand performance. Of breathing that didn't have to be measured. Her body, used to formality even at rest, adjusted without asking permission. She leaned into the warmth because the warmth didn't demand anything back. The chamber recorded a drop in stress markers it had never seen from her species. It adjusted parameters and smiled, if machines can smile. When I woke, it was to the smell of salt and something floral, like rain caught in a memory. My arm was numb in that pleasant way that suggested I'd done something right. I opened one eye, then the other, and found a tail draped over my leg like it belonged there. I did not scream. I considered it. I decided against it. Screaming rarely improved a situation. She was there. The Vulpine Queen. Asleep. In my arms. Breathing slow, ears relaxed, expression unguarded in a way that would have made half the galaxy faint. The chamber lights were low, respectful, traitorous. My brain performed a rapid inventory of sins and came up short. This wasn't on the list. I did what humans do when confronted with the impossible. I checked if I was still breathing, then assumed responsibility anyway. The system chimed cheerfully. Stabilization ongoing, it said, using the same tone it used for successful software updates. Bonding metrics within optimal range. Bonding. Right. That word had a lot of meanings depending on who was listening. To me, it meant glue and awkward conversations. To her people, it meant vows and politics and consequences. To the chamber, it meant numbers behaving themselves. I lay there, frozen, acutely aware of every point of contact and the fact that my heart had decided this was a terrible time to beat louder. She stirred. One eye opened, gold and sharp, then softened when it focused. She didn't flinch. She didn't move away. She assessed, catalogued, and, this was important, did not look displeased. Good, she said quietly, voice rough with sleep. You're still here. I swallowed. I usually am, I said, because when faced with a queen in your arms, honesty is overrated and humor is a life raft. Her ear flicked. The stabilization was effective, she continued, as if we were discussing a successful experiment, and not the fact that my life had just taken a hard turn. Your presence reduced my stress indicators by 37%. That's great, I offered. I charge by the hour. She smiled, slow and curious. Compatibility confirmed, she said, tasting the word. The chamber chose well. I glanced at the display and wished I hadn't. Charts everywhere. Lines behaving like they'd finally been listened to. Somewhere, an alien scientist was going to have a very bad morning. Somewhere else, guards were going to argue about whether interrupting a bonded monarch counted as treason. Right here, a lonely man who went to bed alone realized the machine had found something he'd stopped looking for. I didn't move. Neither did she. The chamber hummed, content. And for the first time in a long while, the ache behind my ribs eased, not because it was fixed, but because it was shared. I learned two things very quickly after that. First, when a Vulpine queen decides something is acceptable, the universe tends to agree out of sheer self-preservation. Second, human panic smells faintly like recycled air and bad decisions. I was deep in it. My arm was still around her because removing it felt like escalating an incident report I hadn't finished writing in my head. She remained where she was, comfortably inconvenient, as if waking up in a human's arms was a line item she'd already checked off. The chamber lights brightened a fraction, as if embarrassed by how well things were going. The queen stretched with deliberate ease, the kind that made you aware of joints and balance, and the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how much space she occupied. Her tail shifted, brushed my leg again, and the system pinged approvingly. Stabilization metrics climbed. My dignity plummeted. You are tense, she observed, not unkindly. This undermines the bonding process. Bonding is doing just fine, I said, gesturing vaguely at the readouts without actually looking at them. I'm more worried about the optics. Optics are a matter of perspective, she replied. From here, the view is acceptable. That was when the station alarms decided to join the conversation. Not the loud ones. The polite ones. The kind that said something had gone wrong in a way that required committees. Footsteps gathered outside the chamber, stopped, and then retreated in a panic I recognized. Vulpine guards did not interrupt bonded royalty. Human technicians did not interrupt anything involving royalty without written permission and a backup plan. The corridor filled with people who suddenly remembered appointments elsewhere. The queen tilted her head, listening. They are distressed. Yeah, I said. That's a thing that happens when expectations meet reality. She considered this. Reality appears stable, she said, glancing at the display. Compatibility remains high. Compatibility. Another word with too many meanings. To her people, it was about alliances and offspring and the careful matching of power. To me, it was about whether someone laughed at the same dumb jokes and didn't mind silence. The chamber had decided those definitions overlapped enough to be useful. I wasn't sure whether to be impressed or offended. The door chimed. A human voice followed, tight and formal. Your Majesty, there appears to be a procedural overlap. Proceed, she said. Silence. Then, with respect, Your Majesty, the human is still present. Yes, she said, like that answered everything. He is optimal. I mouthed an apology to the door. The door did not accept it. What followed was less a confrontation and more a slow-motion pile-up of assumptions. Alien scientists argued in hushed tones about contamination and precedent. Human staff whispered about lawsuits, and whether this counted as a workplace incident. The Queen listened to all of it with the patience of someone used to being the smartest being in the room and the humility of someone trying something new. Through it all, she didn't move away. The system took notes. Eventually, the door opened just enough for a tablet to slide through. The Queen accepted it, scanned the data, and hummed thoughtfully. Your equipment interprets emotional data differently, she said to me. It prioritizes resilience over purity. That's one way to put it, I said. We're messy. We bounce. She smiled at that, sharp and sincere. That is why I am here. The scientists attempted to intervene. They proposed isolation chambers, recalibration, a return to baseline. The chamber rejected the first suggestion outright, citing increased stress. The second produced a warning about destabilization. The third was flagged as inadvisable. The algorithm, bless its cold little heart, had decided the experiment was working and would not be told otherwise. The Queen stood then, gracefully disentangling herself. The absence of her weight was immediate, and annoyingly noticeable. The system logged it as a minor dip and suggested continued proximity. She glanced at the suggestion, then at me. You will accompany me, she said. That sounds like a promotion, I said. Or an arrest. Neither, she replied. Stabilization. Word traveled fast. By the time we reached the observation deck, half the station knew the Queen had bonded with a human. The other half knew better than to ask what that meant. Vulpine courtiers stared as if I'd grown antlers. Humans stared as if I'd won a contest I hadn't entered. Someone started a pool. Someone else tried to sell merchandise. Humanity excels at monetizing confusion. The Queen moved through it all with calm authority, occasionally glancing at me as if checking a gauge only she could see. I did my best to act like this was normal, which meant cracking jokes at the worst possible times and apologizing when they landed. She found this fascinating. You undermine your own status, she noted. Habit, I said. Keeps expectations low. Yet your presence elevates mine, she countered. Curious. We returned to the chamber later, not because anyone ordered us to, but because the system requested it. Strongly. The Queen lay down without ceremony. I hesitated for exactly 1 second before following suit. The machine hummed its approval. Data stabilized? Somewhere, a grand committee cried. As we lay there, side by side, she asked questions. About human rituals. About loneliness. About why we joke when we're afraid. I answered honestly because lying felt pointless and because she listened like it mattered. She shared stories too, of a crown that never slept, of nights spent awake to prove worthiness, of touch measured and rationed. The chamber recorded the exchange as mutual regulation. I thought of it as two tired beings comparing notes. When she drifted off again, closer this time, the system displayed a single line of text. Optimal stabilization achieved. I stared at it, then at the Queen, and felt something shift. Not destiny. Not fate. Just the quiet realization that for all our technology, the thing that worked best was still showing up and staying. Outside, the station buzzed with rumors and fear and speculation. Inside, the chamber kept its counsel. I went to bed alone again that night, technically speaking. The data would argue otherwise. By the third cycle, the station had stopped pretending this was temporary. Schedules shifted around us. Committees formed, dissolved, and reformed with longer names. I was reassigned from maintenance to something called emotional liaison, which came with a badge and no instructions. The Queen accepted this as evidence of human adaptability. I accepted it because the alternative involved explaining feelings to people who thought feelings were a firmware bug. Our proximity became policy. Not written, exactly, more like aggressively implied. The Chamber's reports were impossible to ignore. Stress levels dropped across every interaction we shared. Recovery times improved. Decision accuracy ticked up. The Queen's people whispered about miracles and contamination in equal measure. Humans shrugged and called it a good day. She started borrowing my habits. Not the big ones. The small, humiliating ones. Snacking between meetings. Sitting instead of standing when no one important was watching. Laughing at comments that weren't jokes because the timing felt right. She learned the human pause, the beat before a reply when you're choosing kindness over correctness. The system labeled it microregulation. I called it not making things worse. I learned hers too. How her ears told the truth before her mouth did. How her tail settled when she was content, lashed when she was thinking, stilled when she was angry in a way that could restructure a government. We negotiated space without speaking, adjusted without asking. Compatibility, the Chamber insisted, was climbing. I insisted I was just paying attention. The trouble came when the scientists tried to recreate us. They built simulations. They ran pairings. They fed the Chamber data until it choked on it. They selected candidates with pristine emotional profiles and impeccable credentials. The results were clean and useless. Stabilization flickered and failed. Stress rebounded. The machine flagged outcomes as suboptimal with increasing irritation. They escalated. More variables. Tighter controls. Less mess. The Queen watched the reports with a frown that could curdle milk. They are optimizing, she said. That's the problem, I replied. You can't optimize your way into feeling better. You can only live there. She considered this. Your species accepts inefficiency. We call it character, I said. Or baggage. Depends on the day. Pressure mounted. Vulpine counselors argued that what we had was a political risk. Human diplomats argued it was a public relations nightmare. Both were right. The Queen asked me what I wanted. The question landed heavier than any decree. I want this to stop being a problem, I said. And to keep being this? She nodded. Those goals may be compatible. We put it to the test. Not by hiding, but by inviting scrutiny. Open sessions. Observers. Transparency so thorough it made everyone uncomfortable. The Chamber recorded everything. The Queen spoke plainly about calm and curiosity. I spoke plainly about being tired and trying anyway. The numbers did the rest. Stabilization didn't spike because of romance or ritual. It held because of honesty. Alien reactions ranged from scandalized to fascinated. Some recoiled at the casual way we touched, nothing dramatic, just presence, shared space. Others leaned in, hungry for the trick. The Queen corrected them gently. There is no trick, she said. There is practice. The Council demanded a separation trial. For science. For optics. For control. The Chamber objected. I objected. The Queen agreed on one condition: we defined the terms. Time-limited. Reversible. Measured. Humans love experiments when they get to write the exit clause. The separation was instructive. My stress crept back like a bad habit. Her focus sharpened into something brittle. The data reflected it without mercy. When we reconvened, the relief was immediate and measurable. The Chamber displayed a single word I hadn't seen before: homeostasis. That is a strong claim, a counselor said. So is the data, the Queen replied. They tried one last angle. Power. Accusations of influence. Claims that I was manipulating her with human intimacy. I laughed before I could stop myself. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Humans get blamed for wanting what works. The Queen shut it down. If influence is measured by effect, she said, then yes. He influences me. Toward patience. Toward humor. Toward rest. Her gaze swept the room. If this is dangerous, it is because it is effective. Silence followed. Then assent, reluctant and real. We didn't declare anything. We continued. The chamber updated its model and retired the word compatibility in favor of something Messier. It called it mutual regulation. I called it staying. That night, I lay down expecting nothing. The Queen joined me without ceremony. The system hummed. Outside, the galaxy adjusted. Inside, two flawed beings shared the work of being less alone, and the numbers, finally, made sense. By the time the councils finished arguing, the station had already moved on. Humans do that. We adjust first and explain later. The Queen called it emotional inertia. I called it survival. The chamber updated its permissions, quietly and without asking anyone important, and reclassified our sessions as ongoing diplomatic maintenance. No one wanted to be the one to turn that off. They tried ceremony next. Titles. Frameworks. Boxes to put us in so they could stop thinking about it. The Queen declined with grace. I declined with a shrug. Neither response fit the forms. The data did. Stabilization held. Decision latency dropped. Crisis response improved. Even the most skeptical analysts had to admit the pattern persisted when we were together, and degraded when we weren't. A final hearing was scheduled anyway, because institutions don't know how to quit. The room was full of people who never tried lying down to solve a problem. The Queen spoke first, not as a ruler defending a choice, but as a being reporting results. She talked about rest that didn't feel earned, about laughter that arrived uninvited and stayed. She talked about bonding without ownership and compatibility without conquest. She used their words until they sounded different. They turned to me. I told the truth because I didn't have anything better. I said I wasn't special. I said I was tired. I said humans are good at sitting with discomfort until it gets bored and leaves. I said I went to bed alone because it was easier than hoping, and woke up different because something finally worked without demanding I become someone else. There were objections. Of course there were. Precedent. Image. Power. The Queen listened, then made a decision that sounded small and landed big. She reframed the relationship as an alliance focused on mutual stabilization, renewable at will, terminable without penalty. No claims. No hierarchies. No illusions. The Council approved it because it sounded boring. Revolutions often do. The fallout was immediate and ridiculous. Humans were labeled emotionally hazardous but strategically valuable. Vulpines rewrote etiquette manuals. Other species requested access to human sleep studies with the eagerness of tourists and the fear of pilgrims. The chamber fielded requests until it throttled them. It kept us on a priority list and ignored everyone else. My promotion came through by accident. Someone needed a name on a report and mine was there. The Queen congratulated me with a smile that suggested she knew exactly how uncomfortable that made me. I celebrated with a nap. She joined me, because she could. We never made a show of it. That was the point. The power wasn't in spectacle, it was in consistency. We talked. We rested. We touched in ways that didn't need explanation. The chamber recorded fewer spikes and more steadiness. It learned. Machines are good students when the lesson is simple. One cycle, a delegation asked how we did it. The Queen looked at me. I looked back. I said we stopped trying to win. She translated that into 6 languages and a footnote. It still didn't land. That was fine. Not everything does. The station quieted. Crises came and went. Decisions got made without shouting. I watched the Queen sleep and understood, finally, what the chamber had been measuring all along. Not attraction. Not dominance. Relief. The kind that settles when you don't have to perform. On the night it all felt official. Though nothing was signed, I lay down expecting the usual churn of thoughts. The Queen settled beside me with a familiarity that didn't ask permission. The system chimed once and then stayed quiet, like it trusted us to handle it. "Do you still go to bed alone?" she asked, eyes closed. "Technically," I said. "Depends how you define it." She smiled. "Definitions are flexible." We slept. Not because we were exhausted, though we were. Not because it was strategic, though it helped. We slept because rest had become a shared language. Outside, rumors would continue. Inside, stabilization held. The chamber logged the outcome and powered down unnecessary sensors. I woke with her still there, tail warm against my leg, breath steady. No alarms. No committees. Just the quiet certainty that whatever the galaxy decided to call this, it worked. And for a human who'd gone to bed alone one too many times, that was more than enough.